Gray, I didn't know who else to call.
Who did this to you?
They say I killed him, but someone set me up.
The phone rings at 3 a.m. For a mafia boss, it usually means someone is dead. But when Gray Rossi picked up, it wasn't a hitman. It was a collect call from the county jail. His flawless, buttoned-up secretary was behind bars, and she only wanted one person, him. The digital clock on the mahogany nightstand glowed an angry, blood-red 3:02 a.m. when the encrypted burner phone shattered the silence of the penthouse. Gray Rossi did not jolt awake. Men in his line of work learned early on that startling at sudden noises was a good way to end up dead. He merely opened his eyes, the heavy Chicago rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Gold Coast apartment, and stared at the ceiling. Only 3 people had this specific number. 2 of them were currently running a shipment of untraceable firearms across the Canadian border. The third was supposed to be asleep in her modest, aggressively beige apartment in Lincoln Park. Gray reached out, his tattooed forearm illuminated by the flashes of lightning, and pressed the receiver to his ear. He didn't say a word. Silence was the ultimate defensive play. An inmate at the Cook County Correctional Facility is attempting to reach you. An automated sterile voice droned through the speaker. To accept this call, press 1. Gray frowned, the sharp angles of his face deepening into a scowl. He pressed the button. "Mr. Rossi," the voice on the other end said. It was crisp, perfectly modulated, and completely devoid of panic. It sounded exactly as it did when she informed him his 2 o'clock meeting was canceled, or that a wire transfer had successfully cleared a Cayman's account. "Clara?" Gray sat up, the silk sheets pooling around his waist. "Are you drunk, or is this a bad joke?" "I am neither, sir," Clara Hughes replied. Even through the static of a jailhouse payphone, she sounded remarkably composed. "I apologize for the late hour and the unconventional method of communication. However, I require bail. And a lawyer, preferably Harrison." Gray swung his legs out of bed, his mind racing through 100 different catastrophic scenarios. Clara Hughes was not just a secretary. To the outside world, she was the executive assistant at Rossi Logistics, a legitimate shipping empire. To the underworld, she was the vault. Clara knew every shell company, every bribe paid to local aldermen, and the exact coordinates of every shipment of contraband that moved through the Midwest. If the feds had squeezed her, the entire Rossi family would crumble before breakfast. "Where are you?" Gray demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly baritone. "The 12th District Precinct." Near the meatpacking district, Clara answered calmly. "I would advise you to come personally, Mr. Rossi. There are complications. I'm leaving now. Do not speak to anyone. Do not even ask for a glass of water." "Understood. See you shortly, sir." The line went dead. Gray crushed the phone in his grip for a fleeting second before tossing it onto the bed. He dressed methodically, a tailored black suit, no tie, a charcoal overcoat. He slipped a compact 9mm into the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. It was a risk walking into a police station armed, but walking through Chicago at 3 a.m. unarmed was a death wish. The drive was a blur of neon lights bleeding on wet asphalt. Gray pushed his Maserati to its limits down Lakeshore Drive, the windshield wipers battling the torrential downpour. His knuckles were white against the leather steering wheel. Clara was 28, an Ivy League dropout who wore modest tweed skirts, sensible heels, and thick-rimmed glasses. She didn't drink, she didn't gamble, and she certainly didn't associate with the street-level thugs that populated his world. She was untouchable. So what the hell was she doing in the 12th District lockup? He pulled up to the precinct, ignoring the police vehicle's only sign, and killed the engine. The 12th District was notoriously corrupt, a brutalist concrete building that smelled perpetually of stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and dried sweat. Gray pushed through the heavy glass doors. The desk sergeant, a balding man named Officer Bradley, looked up from a crossword puzzle. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the man stepping into his lobby. Every cop in Chicago knew Gray Rossi. Not all of them were on his payroll, but all of them knew better than to cross him without backup. "Rossi," Bradley said, his hand subtly drifting toward his radio. "Little late for a social call." I'm not here to socialize, Bradley, Gray said, stepping up to the reinforced glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet authority radiating from him was enough to make the air in the room feel heavy. You have an employee of mine in holding, Clara Hughes. I'm here to take her home. Bradley swallowed hard, tapping his keyboard. Hughes, right, white female 28, brought in about an hour ago. He looked up, a nervous sweat beading on his forehead. You can't take her, Gray. She's not here on a D&D or a noise complaint. Gray leaned closer to the glass. Then what is she here for? Bradley hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the holding cells. She was picked up at the Diamond Club. Gray felt a cold spike of adrenaline pierce his chest. The Diamond Club was an underground casino run by the Callahan Syndicate, his biggest rivals in the city. The Rossis and the Callahans had a fragile, blood-soaked truce that was barely holding together. Clara had absolutely no business being within a 5-mile radius of that place. And? Gray prompted, his voice dangerously soft. And, Bradley said, his voice dropping to a whisper, she was found standing in a private VIP room, kneeling next to a dead body. Rossi. She's being held on suspicion of murder in the 1st degree. 10 minutes later, Harrison Reed pushed through the precinct doors. Gray's lawyer was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every penny. Harrison didn't waste time with pleasantries. He flashed a court order, dropped a stack of legal threats on Officer Bradley's desk, and within 5 minutes, Gray and Harrison were standing in a small, windowless interrogation room in the back of the precinct. The heavy steel door clanked shut behind them, locking them inside. Sitting at the center of the scarred metal table was Clara. Gray stopped dead in his tracks. He was used to seeing her perfectly put together. Now, her thick-rimmed glasses were slightly crooked. Her hair, normally pulled into a severe, immaculate bun, had partially fallen out, damp strands clinging to her neck. Her cheek was heavily bruised, a dark purple swelling blooming under her left eye. But it was her clothes that made Gray's jaw clench. She was wearing her usual white silk blouse, but the entire right sleeve and stomach were soaked in a dark, rust-colored stain. Blood. A lot of it. Clara, Gray breathed, pulling out the metal chair across from her and sitting down. Harrison stood by the door, arms crossed, analyzing the room for hidden recording devices. Mr. Rossi, Harrison, Clara said, giving them a polite nod as if they had just walked into a board meeting. Thank you for coming so promptly. Cut the corporate act, Clara, Gray snapped, leaning forward, his eyes burning into hers. You're covered in blood. You've been arrested for murder at a Callahan-run front. Tell me exactly what happened. And tell me now. Clara took a slow, measured breath. Her hands were cuffed to the table, but they didn't shake. I was conducting a private transaction. Personal business. It escalated. Personal business at the Diamond Club? Harrison chimed in, his tone incredulous. Clara, you run logistics for a billion-dollar enterprise. You don't strike me as the underground craps type. I wasn't there to gamble, Clara said quietly. She looked at Gray, and for the first time in the 5 years he had known her, he saw a flicker of genuine vulnerability in her eyes. I was there to pay off a debt, my brother's debt. Gray narrowed his eyes. Toby. He knew Clara had a younger brother, a screw-up who bounced from one rehab to another, but she had always kept him entirely separate from her professional life. Toby got in deep with the Callahans, Clara continued, her voice steadying. 80 grand in sports bets. They told him if he didn't pay by midnight tonight, they were going to put him in an oil drum and sink it in Lake Michigan. I couldn't come to you, Mr. Rossi. You have a truce with Jay Callahan. If you intervened to save my brother, it would be seen as an act of aggression. It could have started a turf war. So you went yourself, Gray said, the anger in his chest warring with a strange, unfamiliar surge of protectiveness. You walked into a mob den with 80 grand in cash. Yes, Clara said. I met with the man holding Toby's marker in the VIP room upstairs. Who? Gray asked. Clara swallowed. Leo Callahan. Silence descended on the small room. Thick and suffocating. Jay Callahan's youngest son. The hot-headed, unpredictable heir to the rival throne. Jesus Christ, Clara, Harrison muttered, running a hand over his face. Tell me you didn't kill Leo Callahan. I didn't, Clara stated firmly, her posture straightening. When I entered the room, the money was in a duffel bag. But Leo was already on the floor. Someone had shot him twice in the chest. He was bleeding out rapidly. I dropped to my knees to see if he was alive. I tried to apply pressure to the wounds. That is how the blood got on my clothes. Why didn't you run? Gray asked, scrutinizing her. Every instinct he had, honed by years on the streets, told him she was telling the truth. If you found him dead, you should have walked out the back door. I tried, Clara said. But as I stood up, I saw the murder weapon on the floor, a silenced .38 caliber, and right next to it was a file folder. Leo had been holding it. I opened it. She paused, looking directly at Gray. It was the financial routing data from the hit on your father 3 years ago. Gray froze. The air in his lungs vanished. 3 years ago, his father, the former boss of the Rossi family, had been gunned down in a restaurant. The hit was officially unsolved, though Gray had suspected the Callahans. He just never had the proof. Leo was the one who funded the hit, Clara said softly. The bank records in that folder proved it, but more importantly, it proved who pulled the trigger for him. Who? Gray demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I didn't have time to read the name, Clara said, shaking her head, because before I could put the file in my bag, the police raided the club. It was too perfectly timed, Mr. Rossi. It wasn't a standard raid. They came straight for the VIP room. They knew Leo was dead. They found me with the blood, and they found the gun. They set you up, Harrison said, pacing the length of the room. The shooter kills Leo, calls in an anonymous tip, and leaves you to take the fall. It's a clean sweep. The Callahans will think the Rossis sent you to assassinate Leo. The truce breaks, war starts, and the real killer walks away in the chaos. Exactly, Clara said. That is why I allowed myself to be arrested. Gray looked at her, his brow furrowing. Allowed? I could have hidden in the ventilation shafts. I know the blueprints of the Diamond Club. But I realized that out on the streets, I was a walking dead woman. The Callahans would hunt me, and whoever set me up would make sure I didn't survive the night to tell my story. Clara leaned forward, the chains of her handcuffs rattling against the metal table. I needed to be in police custody. I needed to use my one phone call to get you here, Gray. It was the first time she had ever used his first name. Because, Clara whispered, her eyes darting toward the small glass window of the interrogation room door, the man who killed Leo Callahan wasn't a rival gangster. He's a cop. Before Gray could respond, the heavy steel door clicked and swung open. A tall man in a crumpled beige trench coat stepped into the room. He had a rugged, deeply lined face, a cheap cigar chewed to a pulp in the corner of his mouth, and a badge clipped to his belt. Detective Thomas Gallagher, the head of the Organized Crime Division. Gallagher smirked, pulling the cigar from his mouth. Well, well. Gray Rossi and his high-priced mouthpiece, touching loyalty, coming down here for the help. Clara's breath hitched. Underneath the table, her knee pressed against Gray's leg. It was a subtle, desperate contact. Gray looked at her, then followed her gaze to the heavy silver watch on Gallagher's left wrist. Gray remembered that watch. It was a custom Rolex. His father had been wearing it the night he was murdered. It had vanished from the crime scene. Detective Gallagher, Gray said, leaning back in his chair, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face. We were just talking about you. The interrogation room felt as though it had been plunged into a vacuum. Gallagher froze, his hand pausing halfway to his mouth with the mangled cigar. His eyes, cold and dead as river stones, flicked from Gray to Clara, then back to the lawyer standing by the door. I don't know what you're implying, Rossi, Gallagher grunted, leaning against the doorframe, trying to project a casual dominance. I just walked in to check on my murder suspect. The Callahans are already screaming for blood. Jay Callahan wants her head on a pike by sunrise. Is that right? Gray murmured. He didn't stand up. He didn't need to. He simply reached out and rested his large, ringed hand over Clara's trembling, handcuffed wrists. The contrast was striking, his dark, scarred knuckles against her pale, bruised skin. "Because from where I'm sitting, Detective, you look a little flushed. Heavy watch dragging your arm down?" Gallagher's jaw tightened. He casually slipped his left hand into the pocket of his trench coat, hiding the silver Rolex. "You're out of your depth, Gray. Your little secretary here was found literally red-handed. The DA is going to fast-track this. Life without parole at Dwight Correctional. Unless I sign over the South Side shipping routes to the CPD's pension fund," Gray finished for him, his voice laced with venom. "It's a tragic situation," Gallagher feigned a sigh. "But with the right cooperative spirit, maybe evidence gets misplaced. Maybe she walks on a self-defense charge." Harrison stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs. "Detective Gallagher, as of 2 minutes ago, I filed an emergency habeas corpus petition with Judge Rosenthal, who, unlike you, is not currently under investigation by Internal Affairs. My client was denied her Miranda rights, held in an unauthorized interrogation block, and interrogated without counsel." "She hasn't been interrogated," Gallagher barked. "Then she is free to go," Clara said. Her voice cut through the testosterone-heavy room like a scalpel. She looked up, her thick-rimmed glasses catching the harsh fluorescent light. "And Detective, when your officers tackled me at the Diamond Club, they were very thorough in confiscating my purse, but they were significantly less thorough in checking the lining of my blazer." Gallagher's face drained of color. Beneath the table, Gray felt Clara's fingers press something small, hard, and plastic into his palm. A micro SD card. The physical file was left on the floor. Clara continued smoothly, slipping back into her flawless, professional cadence. But the flash drive attached to the ledger, the one containing the offshore routing numbers from Credit Suisse, that is currently leaving this precinct. Along with me, Gallagher lunged. It was a stupid, desperate move of a cornered animal. Gray was faster. In a blur of motion, the Mafia Boss was out of his chair. He slammed his forearm into Gallagher's throat, pinning the dirty cop against the concrete wall with a sickening crack. Gray's 9mm was drawn and pressed directly under Gallagher's chin before the detective could even gasp for air. "You touch her," Gray whispered, his face inches from Gallagher's sweating forehead. "You even look at her, and I will paint this room with your brains. Do you understand me? You kill a cop in a precinct, you both fry," Gallagher choked out, a line of spit trailing down his chin. "He won't kill you," Harrison said calmly, opening his briefcase. "But the Callahans will. Once we give Jay Callahan this flash drive proving you murdered his son to start a gang war and seize the docks, there isn't a hole deep enough on this earth for you to hide in." Gray held the detective against the wall for 3 agonizing seconds, his eyes dark with the ghosts of his murdered father. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. He grabbed Gallagher by the lapels and threw him to the floor. "Unlock her," Gray commanded. Gallagher, wheezing and clutching his throat, tossed the handcuff keys onto the metal table. Gray unlocked Clara's wrists himself. Her skin was chafed raw, but she didn't flinch. They walked out of the 12th District side by side, leaving Gallagher coughing on the floor. The rain had intensified, turning the Chicago streets into a slick, black mirror. Gray opened the passenger door of the Maserati for Clara. She slid in, and the moment the heavy door shut, the professional armor she had worn all night finally cracked. She let out a ragged breath, her hands shaking violently as the adrenaline left her system. Gray got into the driver's seat, but he didn't start the engine. The only sound was the rhythmic beating of the rain against the roof. He unbuttoned his charcoal overcoat and draped it over her shivering shoulders. The scent of his cedar and gunmetal cologne enveloped her. "You reckless, brilliant idiot," Gray said, his voice dropping its harsh edge, replaced by a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "You could have been killed." Clara looked at him, her dark eyes wide behind her crooked glasses. "I couldn't let them erase the truth about your father, Gray. I couldn't let them use my brother to destroy you." Gray reached out, his thumb gently grazing her unbruised cheek. The touch sent a shockwave through the cramped interior of the car. He had spent 5 years treating her as a machine, an untouchable ghost who kept his empire running. But looking at her now, covered in blood, bruised, wearing his coat, the boundaries dissolved. "You aren't going back to that apartment in Lincoln Park," Gray murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "From now on, you stay with me. You're mine to protect now, Clara." "I am not just something to be protected, Mr. Rossi," she whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. "I know," Gray said, a fierce, primal vow echoing in the quiet car. "You're my partner, and tonight we're going to war." The penthouse suite at the Peninsula Chicago was a fortress in the sky, booked under a shell corporation. Gray didn't take her to his Gold Coast apartment. Gallagher would expect that. Inside the opulent marble bathroom, Clara sat on the edge of the sunken tub. She had discarded the ruined, blood-soaked silk blouse. She sat only in a black lace bralette and her tweed skirt, shivering despite the warmth of the room. Gray knelt before her with a first aid kit. He was stripped down to his dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing the intricate ink of the Rossi family crest on his forearms. He worked in heavy, loaded silence, using an antiseptic wipe to clean the dried blood from her neck and the harsh bruise blooming on her cheekbone. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly, his knuckles brushing her collarbone. "Only when I think about how much my brother owes," Clara replied, a dry, defensive humor masking her exhaustion. Gray stopped. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Toby's debt is erased. I already sent Harrison to buy the marker. Your brother is being put on a plane to a private rehabilitation center in Switzerland as we speak. He's safe. You're safe." Clara's breath hitched. Tears, the first she had allowed herself to shed all night, pricked her eyes. "Gray, why?" "Because," Gray said, his voice turning into a low, vibrating growl as he leaned closer. "For 5 years I've watched you run my life perfectly, but I was too blind to see that you are my life." He didn't wait for her permission this time. He cupped her jaw and pulled her down into a kiss. It was desperate, bruising, and tasted of rain and copper. Clara gasped, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him flush against her. The restrained, buttoned-up secretary vanished, replaced by a woman who matched the Mafia Boss's intensity fire for fire. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, the air crackling with undeniable electricity. "Tomorrow," Gray whispered against her lips. "Tomorrow we burn Gallagher to the ground. Tonight you let me take care of you." By 10 a.m. the next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed clean. The atmosphere inside the abandoned Rossi meatpacking warehouse on Lower Wacker Drive, however, was suffocating. Gray stood at the head of a long, stainless steel table. To his right stood Clara. She was wearing a sleek, tailored black suit that Gray had arranged for her, her glasses traded for contacts, her hair falling in loose, dark waves. She looked less like a secretary and more like a queen. Across from them sat Jay Callahan. The aging mob boss looked 10 years older than he had the day before, grief carving deep canyons into his face. Flanking him were a dozen heavily armed men. "You have a lot of nerve calling a sit-down, Rossi," Jay spat, his voice trembling with rage. "Your girl killed my boy." "My girl," Gray said, the possessive pronoun making Clara's pulse jump. "Tried to save your boy's life. He was bleeding out before she even walked into the room." Gray nodded to Clara. She stepped forward, entirely unfazed by the guns pointed in her direction, and slid a sleek black laptop across the steel table. She pressed play. "The flash drive I recovered from Leo's possession contained an audio recording and financial ledgers," Clara explained, her voice echoing in the cavernous warehouse. "Leo discovered who truly orchestrated the hit on the late Don Rossi. He was blackmailing the killer." The audio played. It was Leo Callahan's voice, followed by the undeniable, gravelly voice of Detective Thomas Gallagher. "You think you can squeeze me, you little punk?" Gallagher's recorded voice sneered. "I killed the old man Rossi for your father so you could have the city. Now you want my cut of the docks? I want all of it, Tommy. Or I take this ledger to Gray Rossi and let him gut you." The sound of 2 suppressed gunshots echoed from the laptop speakers. Then, A thud. Jay Callahan stared at the screen, all the color draining from his face. Gallagher, he whispered, that dirty double-crossing badge. He played us both, Jay, Gray said coldly. He took out my father on your payroll, then took out your son to take over the docks for his cartel friends. He wanted us to destroy each other in retaliation. Where is he? Jay demanded, standing up, his eyes wide with a murderous frenzy. I took the liberty of arranging a meeting, Clara said, checking her watch. I sent an encrypted message from Leo's phone an hour ago, informing Gallagher that the Ledger survived the precinct raid and demanding a payoff. Right on cue, the heavy metal doors of the warehouse shrieked open. Detective Gallagher strode in, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the combined forces of the Rossi and Callahan families waiting for him. His eyes locked onto Clara, then to Gray, and finally to Jay Callahan. He realized, in a fraction of a second, that he was a dead man walking. Gallagher drew his weapon, but he never even got the safety off. The room erupted in deafening gunfire. It wasn't Gray who shot him. It was Jay Callahan, emptying an entire clip into the man who murdered his youngest son. Gallagher fell to the concrete floor, his blood pooling around the very Rolex he had stolen from Gray's father 3 years ago. Silence returned to the warehouse, heavy and absolute. Jay Callahan holstered his smoking gun. He looked at Gray, then respectfully nodded to Clara. The debt is paid, Rossi. The truce holds. The truce holds, Gray agreed. As the Callahans filed out of the warehouse, leaving the police to deal with the mess of a corrupt cop, Gray turned to Clara. He reached down, unclasped the blood-splattered silver Rolex from Gallagher's lifeless wrist, and slipped it into his pocket. Justice was served. Gray wrapped his arm around Clara's waist, pulling her flush against his side. So, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, are you going to ask for a raise, Miss Hughes, or a promotion? Clara looked up at him, a dangerous, beautiful smile playing on her lips. I think, Mr. Rossi, I'm ready to take over as partner, in every sense of the word. Gray chuckled, a dark, rich sound that filled the empty space. Deal. They walked out into the blinding Chicago sunlight, the boss and his secretary no longer hiding in the shadows, ready to rule the city together. Did this 3 a.m. Mafia plot twist keep you on the edge of your seat? The line between business and pleasure just got dangerously blurred. If you loved this intense story of loyalty, betrayal, and unexpected romance, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share with your fellow drama lovers and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding stories every single week. See you next time.